Okay, so this segment is called One Man's Trash. And derived from the saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure, we find someone who has a really controversial opinion about something that most people hate. And that person wants to defend it. They want an outlet to say, no, this is a really beautiful and wonderful thing. And joining us for this segment, we have Dave Bulmer, DemonTomatoDave, to discuss the Popeye movie.
Hello there, one man's trash, and it's me, Dave.
Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Yeah, welcome to this segment. Euan and I have both watched this Popeye movie as of yesterday.
Well done. It's a difficult process to go through for the first time, I understand.
Yeah.
Oh, it was.
So the story behind
we
this,
have questions.
I have answers.
I was interested because you had told us that you liked this movie.
Yes.
This is the first movie I ever remember not liking. I was maybe 8 or 9.
Oh,
and
wow!
It was the first time I'd ever decided, no, this is not something I'm enjoying as a child. So,
yes.
Kind of an important movie in my history.
Oh, wow. It's a real milestone, yeah.
Yeah. But so that's why I was fascinated to hear your hot take.
So while Euan has this history of, like, he didn't like it from a young age, from having had an experience with it, I've never seen it before. I knew vaguely that it existed only from screenshots because Robin Williams was in it. So this was my very first experience with it, and I didn't hate it. However, for every reason that I thought, after the movie, I wanted to like it and then couldn't think of any single reason to actually go through with forming an opinion of approval about what I just watched. So it was a very conflicted emotional experience for me. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with the first question.
Okay.
And this is the one that bugged. There were a lot of things that bugged me, but this is the first one that I just didn't understand, which was setting up the scene. Olive and Bluto are getting engaged. And Olive, at the engagement party, which has been talked about in the day prior, is escaping. And
yes,
where is she escaping to, and why is she escaping secretly, I guess?
Okay, I can answer these questions, but first of all, I want to just say that on some level, they're the wrong questions to ask. because I think what most people do when they watch this film, and the reason why it doesn't sit well with a lot of people, is that most of the time when you watch a film, it's to find out what happens in the film, and genuinely I don't think that's what this film is for, and it's certainly not what I'm in it for. It has almost no story at all. It's not that nothing's happening; things happen, and those things do follow on from one another, but the story doesn't matter. It's what I love about this film, and I won't say too much in case this is the answer to a later question, is how basically they just put cameras in this mad little shanty town that seems to be locked away from time and space, and you just live there for a while. And that's what I like about this film. But in answer to the actual question, she's escaping because she's marrying Bluto. Mm-hmm. That's why she's escaping in secret.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because she's engaged to Bluto.
But he's large.
He is, and that's the thing. That song it sets up it's her trying to put a good spin on the fact that she's locked into this engagement with this guy, and she can't come up with any good reasons.
Much like Spanky with the movie.
Exactly. That song is your song, Spanky. At least, except, instead of he's large, it could be called, like, I don't know, It's Long.
It is a very long movie. So in that song, though, she's giving the reasons why she's kind of explaining why it makes, it's not that bad of a thing. But also, that song is where she's packing, secretly throwing stuff into her suitcase to run away. So it's also like it's a complete lie.
Yes. Yes, exactly. These are all, everyone you see in this film are like, they have these weird little lives where they're all lying to each other, and they're all sort of just going about their business and trying to look good. And that's her thing. She's got this whole she's got this pride. Like, her whole sort of, in the first few scenes of the film, she's this very obstinate character, and she's quite unlikable because she's going around sort of feeling that she's grand because she's engaged to this guy. And it's clear that she, or at least by that point with that song, it's clear that she doesn't actually like this guy. She doesn't want to marry him, but she's staked all of her sort of being and reputation on the fact that she's engaged to him, and that's where she gets her standing in the community from. But yeah, secretly she just wants to escape. Where she's escaping to, I don't know. I don't think she knows. I think she just packs her stuff and kind of heads on down to... Well, in fact, there's a bit, isn't there, where she's sort of pointing in all directions as to where she's going to go, because it's not really established.
Yes. So she's kind of wandering around the docks and going from to and fro to decide her direction.
Yeah, I think really, I don't think she's come up with a plan, but I think the ultimate plan that she was sort of ambling towards is to just find a sailor and to find a boat. And I guess she finds a sailor, but not a boat.
Okay. So, Euan, prior to the point where we're at now, prior to her leaving the engagement party, so up until this point in the movie, do you have anything that sticks out in your mind that you want to ask about? Because there's something that comes immediately after this that I want to talk about, but I don't want it to overshadow anything that might have happened in the first bit of the movie.
Well, I think you have so many questions because there are so many strange leaps in logic throughout every single event in the movie. The one I wanted to talk about, it kind of... there's an event relating to it that happens later, but the tax collector.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, when I think Popeye, I don't think tax collectors. It's like a very strange thing to joke about.
Well, no, yes, you're absolutely right. And I think I think the thing I love about this, and the thing that most people don't either dislike or just don't like, is that there's nothing about this film that's what you think of when you think of Popeye.
Yeah.
This is a situation where a very particular sort of filmmaker was given a very different sort of film to do than he does. I mean, I haven't seen many Robert Altman films, but the ones I have seen, they're all done in this way. They're all done with odd, overlapping, like half improvised dialogue, and he just likes to show you some odd people and what they're getting on with, and so. Now, I think that I think there's a very good argument for making a Popeye film this way because of the fact that he just fits in so well with the idea of this odd little seaside town. But I think the big sort of clash that most people have with this film, including when it first came out, is that the Popeye that this is a reasonable adaptation of is not the one most people know about. The most famous Popeye is the sort of the 1930s, is it? Cartoons, the old black and white cinematic cartoons.
The Fleischer Brothers cartoons.
The Fleischer cartoons, yes, which were... I've done some reading about this. They really were phenomenally famous. I know that he has this lasting legacy, so we all assume it was famous, but no, he really was, I mean, for a while, sort of hands down, beating Mickey Mouse, the most popular cartoon character. And he was everywhere, and he was on everything, and this was because of the popularity of the cartoons. But the cartoons were based on a comic strip. Popeye comes from a comic strip, which wasn't even called Popeye; it was called Thimble Theatre, and it was just about these odd little people living these odd little lives, and that's why I think this style works so well, and that's why, for instance, he's not, he's reluctant to eat spinach because that comes from the cartoons. He never used to eat spinach in the comics. He just was the way he was. So when you have this rambling comic strip, which, Popeye was a bit character in it. He just, one day, the characters from this comic strip, who were Castor Oil, Olive Oil's sort of little round brother who's in the film, and Olive Oil and their parents, they were the main characters. And they just needed to hire a boat one day, and Popeye was the random sailor character that the cartoonist E.C. Seeger came up with that day. And he was just so popular that he eventually became the sort of breakout hit. And so that is the Popeye that this is an adaptation of. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say that it's a, if you'd read the comics, you'd agree that this is a perfect adaptation. It's, it's very much its own weird thing with its own weird style. But it kind of makes more sense that this be an adaptation of that. But of course, when they did it, all anybody wanted to see was the sort of, the spinach cartoons. and that's why you have the very odd ending that you have, which I think you'll agree is probably the weakest bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
It definitely wasn't strong, but I'm not sure if I'd call it the weakest bit, because it was at least entertaining, and there were some parts of the movie I did not quite find entertaining.
Well, then you'll be interested then to know that bit, the whole ending fight with the octopus and olive oil trapped in the sort of funnel and in the water and so on, was all filmed sort of after the production had shut down, because they got to the point where they'd done so much stuff and spent so much money and time that the production company just pulled the plug before the film was finished. And so they were like, well, okay, we've got this tank, let's make up an ending now. And they did. Mm-hmm. So it was, really cobbled together, half improvised sort of ending with just bits and props that they happened to have built for what was going to be the actual ending.
Okay, so I want to talk about a thing that I thought made no sense and was a huge point. Like, it may be my biggest point of content with the movie, because the physical attributes of Popeye and like the spinning around and the cartoony, that didn't bother me so much.
Like when he gets spun around by Bluto and he drills through. That was one of my favorite bits. Cause
that was just fun. I liked that.
Or like
all of that makes a lot of sense because it's supposed to look like a cartoon. It has the weird hoop Popeye.
Yeah. There are moments like that where I'm like, oh, that's close.
I definitely was a fan of moments like that in the movie. A moment in the movie that I didn't like was the introduction of Sweet Pea, the baby, and anything further in the movie to do with the baby, including the major plot points about the baby being psychic. I was not a fan of, because I wouldn't say I'm familiar with Thimble Theater, or really even the cartoon. I'm only, vaguely aware from exposure in random places. Yeah. But I don't remember the baby being psychic.
The baby was absolutely not psychic. You are correct.
I remember, it's vague memories of the baby being slightly mischievous and would sometimes hit people in a comical way. That's what Sweet Pea is in my memory. So in this movie, he's a psychic, kind of like a magic 8-ball that's always correct. And then I think Wimpy steals the baby, Sweet Pea, to go to the horse races. And that was probably the worst part of the movie, in my opinion, because it was like, let's introduce a moral dilemma in the middle of the movie with a character who has so far just been comic relief that then gets resolved in the same scene and never is brought up again, outside of the continuing fact that the baby is a psychic.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, do they even use the baby being psychic again? I'm struggling to think.
Only to find the treasure. But that's...
Oh yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But it's still it's like the baby answers true or false questions with a whistle if it's true. So when Bluto has possession of Sweet Pea, he's just like, is there a treasure? He's like, and so that means yes, there is a treasure. So it's like, okay, but you probably could have assumed that. So it's like a major plot point, but then it's like, I don't know why, because I felt like the movie was so incoherent anyway that trying to have a plot point like that didn't make sense, because you could have just had a treasure map or whatever, and it would have
yes, they could have done. Well, this goes back to what I was saying before about there being no point in trying to watch this film as if it's supposed to have a plot. There is absolutely no structure, and yes, things do just sort of happen one scene to the next. But however, there is an answer. If we're going to pose this as a question, I can explain why this has ended up in the film the way it has, and I'm going to answer this in two parts. And the first part is that I'm going to answer Euan's question from a minute ago that I just didn't answer, which is the tax man. Basically, Popeye was a Depression-era character, and so there's always been baked into it this sort of sense of of poverty, really. There's always been this sense of struggling financially, and that is... maybe it's a nod to that, or maybe it's simply something Robert Altman wanted to talk about. I have absolutely no idea which one it is, but I think it fits in nicely enough to the setting that you've got, which is that weird little ramshackle town where everyone's sort of trapped there in a... It's ambiguous what era it is, and I've always sort of thought of it as it is sort of 1930s. The question is the rest of the world 1930s, or has Popeye accidentally sailed in there and found this odd, locked-off place?
The thing about that is there is one line that when Poop Deck Pappy, which, okay, that might be my least favorite part of the movie, is when he's trying to get Popeye to eat the spinach, and Popeye just devolves into a whining baby about eating spinach.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I love that.
I did like that scene. I didn't like anything else. What's funny is that's the scene you hated the most. But in the exchange with Pappy and Popeye, I hated everything but that scene because it was funny. But the rest, it's like, well, here's your childhood story. It's like, I don't give a damn about the childhood story of Popeye. But then he did the, I don't want to eat my spinach. I don't want to eat my spinach. Like, that was funny to me. I liked it.
What I thought was like, it's, oh no, I'm not your daddy. I'm not your daddy. And then like 5 or 10 movie minutes later, it's like, I'm your daddy. No, you're not. And there was no clear arc of how they got from one to the other. But
see, I liked that.
Anyway.
I can see why you would hate that, but I liked it.
Anyway, my point was, there's like one throwaway line where he says that it was the Depression and you wouldn't eat your spinach. So the implication is that it was the Depression when Popeye was a baby, so now it's like however many years on. 20 years maybe.
Oh, does he say that? Oh, I don't remember that line. I remember your mother upped and died and he wouldn't eat his spinach. I remember that one.
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. But anyway, yeah, so I guess the Taxman thing might be to do with that, or it might just be Robert Altman. Okay, so part 2, where I answer your observation as though it were a question, Spanky. The actual reason for that, if you want like behind the scenesy stuff, is that that was going to be the Jeep, which is a character from the comics and cartoons and all of it, which is this odd little animal who was psychic and could fly and go invisible and do all sorts of things, but they just couldn't get it to work. They couldn't come up with a special effect for that, so they went, oh, okay, well, since we're having this storyline anyway, why don't we make it more personal? We'll make it the baby, which makes you think, I mean, it's such an odd way of making a film. Just like, okay, we'll turn that into that and we'll do that. But imagine how much worse it would have been if they didn't. What little sort of plot coherence there is, at least is tied to this fact that, he's gradually becoming a parent, essentially. And then this baby is kidnapped. And there's that moment where he's sort of realizes there's the celebration because he's just knocked the taxman in the water and he realizes his baby is being kidnapped in the background. That's
the scene I wanted to talk about when I brought up the taxman, because did he kill the taxman? We never see him again in the movie. He just falls into the water and is never seen again. I'm pretty sure they're celebrating the assassination of the tax collector.
Metaphorically, yeah. I mean, I think he just goes in the water. I think you do see him like spitting out water and shaking his face about, but yeah, that he's never in the film again, so metaphorically speaking, he is defeated, yeah.
I want to talk about fight scenes, because there were several in this movie, and none of them made any sense to me. I mean, some of them did, but a lot of them did not. So the first fight scene we encounter is the basically the bar fight scene, although it's a restaurant, not actually a tavern. Yeah. And I had no clue what was going on for most of it. It seemed like they had cobbled together some comic strips where some similar things had happened, where basically these guys were, just generic bar fight scenario, egging on Popeye, and then he, in Popeye fashion, takes them out. And then like you had the character who, I can't remember which character it was, but got shoved through the roof, and then there was another character that got put on the stove. And during that scene, we hadn't been introduced to basically any characters yet. That was post Popeye's introduction to olive oil. But then the next morning, that's basically the first thing that happens is he goes to the restaurant, and we know Wimpy because he's he's probably the third, like after olive oil and Popeye, the third most recognizable Popeye character because he's interested in the burger, which is his kind of thing.
He's interested in the burger.
He's a burger aficionado,
Yes.
a connoisseur of the hamburger. So that's his character trait. He's interested in the burger. So I like that, but then we have this thing where your pappy or your dad, they insult his father, which is what makes him go off a little bit. But all we have at that point is that he has his 5 minutes, not even maybe a minute long scene where he's talking to the picture frame and then hangs the picture frame up and there's no picture. It just says "me pappy."
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Which is funny.
Part of the movie.
That is a funny scene, and that is done very, very well, and I love everything about that scene. But then we understand that he's sensitive about his father, but then we don't really know any story about, obviously trying to attribute story to this movie gets you nowhere. Sure. But still, it just seems like, okay, this sets him off, so we're expecting kind of I guess maybe it's a modern thing where I'm so used to this happening in modern movies, so that when it happens in a movie from 1980, it doesn't work the same way. But the fight takes forever. It takes so long. It takes a solid 10 minutes, and there's only 5 people to fight. So they're make this guy apologize, make that guy apologize, make this other guy apologize, and that's the scene that happens. And then Popeye does the juggling punches on one guy's face for 30 seconds. It takes so long.
Oh, look, you're right, but I love that bit. I don't know why. It does make me laugh. It just does make me laugh.
So that's the first fight scene I wanted to discuss, which wasn't my least favorite fight scene in the movie. I
like that one. I know it goes on a while, but I think basically something that this film doesn't fully succeed at, but I like that it tried to do it, is the sort of knockabout cartoon stuff. And basically what they did, this is worth discussing, by the way. I ought to tell you about this. There's nothing artificial about what you see. For this film was mad enough to build a town. And they did build a town. And the interiors of the buildings are the interiors of the buildings. And it's still there. You can go there. It's in Malta.
Okay.
Yeah. No, really. It's now.
Let's go to Malta again.
It's in Malta, and they've turned it into a little Popeye theme park. And people have dressed up as Popeye and stuff, and you can go there still. Except that there's been concern recently that it might be about to fall into the ocean because of a crack in the rock. But I think they've decided that that's a really ancient crack in the rock and not a recent thing, so it's okay. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so they built this town, and then they went, okay, so we need everyone in it to be plausibly a real life version of a black and white Fleischer cartoon. So what they did was they hired only circus performers. So every single person in that town is in some way a trained acrobat or juggler or something. I mean, you saw the guy who really, the really wiggly bendy guy who keeps getting highlighted. He's actually a named character from the old comics. He's Olive Oil's previous boyfriend, Ham Gravy, but they don't really say that in the film. He's the one who gets concertinaed down when Pluto squashes him. So having done that, having hired all of these sort of silly people that can do silly things, I guess they just wanted to use them as much as they possibly could. And I think we're just looking at an editing situation where they filmed a load of stuff and perhaps should have cut down on that stuff. But I don't mind. I like that scene.
So, do you have any thoughts about that scene, Euan, or can I move on to the next scene?
So I just want to say, you take issue with the fight scenes. I take issue with the musical numbers, which...
Okay, that's the next thing I'm going to discuss, but I want to run through the fight stuff first. Hold that thought. We're going to come right back to it after I discuss...
I was guessing there'd be a big question about the songs, because they are I think
Euan and I diverge on our opinions about the musical stuff. I might be on Dave's side. So we'll save that for a moment. The next fight scene of any significance, really, is the boxing scene, where they introduce a character just at the end of, I think, the horse race scene via a poster. Also, there's this really strong guy.
Yeah, Oxblood Oxheart.
Yeah, there's Oxblood Oxheart coming, and now he's gonna do fights at people, and then we've got Castor, who wants to fight him for, I guess, money.
No, it is money. But now this is one of the points in which they do tell a story properly. Do you remember just previously? And you have to almost have headphones on. You have to be able to tune in and listen to what people are saying in the weird rambly dialogue scenes. But we've just had a previous scene where the taxman has basically gone into the oil household and read out so much that he's decided they owe that they've lost everything, including their home. So Castor is trying to win money for that reason.
Yes, which is after Bluto destroys the place in a musical number, which we'll discuss in a minute. We will. So that makes a pretty good story, but it's almost like if you were to write a story about this movie and you were to say Bluto destroyed the oil's home and they got to get money, and then Castor tries to get the money but can't, and then Popeye ends up fighting and winning the money. That's a whole story right there. That's a cartoon episode in itself. So it's almost like it is like drop kicked into the middle of this movie, because afterwards nothing in that movie comes up except for a brief mention by Olive, who says, "I asked Sweepy if you were gonna win," and
that's right.
Sweepy whistled. But anyway, that fight scene was probably the most fun to watch. It was very fun. It was in the ring, and then like the whole like the mother was in the corner, and it was a very much like cartoony, like segmented scene where I felt it didn't last too long. So I liked everything about it, and except for I felt like the scenes with Castor were drawn out a little too long, and then he gets like uppercutted into oblivion.
You get Smash Bros out of there.
Yeah, like it's basically Super Smash Brothers style. Like you have eliminated Castor Oil, which I'm glad he shows up again in the movie. But also, like the Taxman, I thought maybe he'd just be dead. Like, oh, that's the end of Olive's brother Castor. But no, that is, I think, my favorite fight scene in the whole movie. I just think that it is, because it's almost part, like if you start at the cut when they show that fight advertisement poster all the way up until Popeye wins, that is almost a full episode of like what could be a series. And I think that right there is coherent and nice.
And I gather that is actually almost straight adaptation of something that was in one of the in the comic strip at one point. I think they do that fight. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't read them, but I seem to think that's what it is. But yes, I wonder whether you can look at the whole film as being episodic like that. That's one of the ones that's sort of the most clearly its own thing that starts and finishes and is wrapped up. But you could make out that the whole film is episodic in that way. You could say that the initial bar fight is one and the other little bits are one. But that one does stand out a bit. Worth mentioning, the character Oxheart may or may not suddenly turn up. He is actually in the whole film. He's always one of the villagers. You can see him in the bar scene. He's got a little tiny mum who is always sitting with him, and I think she's sort of egging him on in the fight scene as well. But
and then he punches
I
her.
do get oh, that's right, mother. Yeah. And I do get the sense that it is almost as if his character reboots just for that scene and becomes something else. And this is something that they do all the way through. This one is deliberate. So, for example, there's the bit where they suddenly go to the horse races, and all of the characters who you've seen in the village so far suddenly show up with completely... it's all the same cast, but they're almost being different people. It's like you go to the seedy underworld upside-down version of Sweet Haven, and now everyone is these dodgy gambler types. And in fact, he goes through the sort of... well, there's a sort of room full of prostitutes, doesn't he? And they, previously, the same actors have been the sort of the sensible, pretty wives from the village.
That doesn't
and
bode
so
well.
it's just this odd moment. Well, it's just this odd moment where all the characters switch into something else and become a different set of characters for a while. And they thought of it as like how you would in a stage production. Everyone would just get different costumes on, and we'd all accept that they're different people. But if you like, you can have headcanon that it's actually the same characters. I think there's an element of that to Oxblood Oxheart. I think he is the guy that we've already seen, but now he's the famous Oxblood Oxheart, whereas a minute ago he was just this guy from the town.
Since we're talking about fights, I just wanted to point out the last fight in the movie, which is of Popeye finally eating spinach that's found in the treasure chest. That turns Popeye into Popeye from the cartoons, basically, where he's now capable of just of ultimate strength, I guess.
Yeah.
Which means he has a giant arm for one single shot, and then
for one single shot, you have a prosthetic arm come out from under the water and hit Bluto. But he
it's better than that. It's better than that. Another not quite successful, but I appreciate it anyway, attempt to make a cartoon thing happen in real life. Bluto, there's all this frothing water that Bluto's like, what's going on? Because Popeye's down there. And he actually puts his fingers in the water and opens it up to look inside and the fist comes out there. I like that bit.
I didn't notice that, but if that's true, I've gained a new appreciation for this scene. I thought, and now knowing that what you've told me that I didn't know about the final scene being kind of an afterthought mostly.
Yeah.
I thought that the octopus thing was really, really stupid, and might have been my as far as plot. And I get that the plot, you can't apply it too much, but even to throw it in as a plot segment to me,
it's totally fair to want to watch a film that has a plot. It's reasonable.
That's true, but even if I throw that aside and I still look at all the elements of what I'm supposed to be translating into brain thoughts that work to me, I see the octopus as just totally stupid. Now I don't want to attack the I don't know if it's a puppet or whatever, but whatever type of effect they use, the practical effect they used to create the octopus was really good. As far as an effect goes, it looked cool underwater. The eyes were menacing in kind of a Fleischer cartoon way, but didn't seem too crazy. And then it gets punched into oblivion, and it's another one of those things that just gets punched until it disappears into the sky.
It actually flies off and all but disappears in a ping.
Yeah, basically that. So although that was fun, everything leading up to it about here's Bluto going underwater to get the treasure, and there's an everything about that to me was completely stupid, and that's what makes it my least favorite fight scene in the movie. But also, I don't credit the octopus with it being bad. I just credit the fact that the octopus was now the final boss that didn't exist up until
it didn't exist
you
until
see
then.
it underwater.
There was no. Yeah, they should maybe have, if the villagers had some sort of legend of a big octopus, or if there had been big octopus, motifs around the village or something to imply that everyone knew about it. Yeah, and there
were plenty of scenes with boats at the dock. You could have been just had them get random, something. I think if I'm remaking the movie in my brain, just in the background scenes when you're not noticing, have boats and stuff in the background just get dragged under by octopus arms, and then at the end, you're oh, that's so cool. But then they never did that. So now
and
you're
you know what? And there was a really good opportunity for them to do that, because they one of the expenditures of this film was that they hired this giant boat, and they were going to film the whole sort of casino-y at the races scene inside this giant big ship, but it sank. The weather there was absolutely awful and taxing and so on, which is kind of why they hadn't got the ending filmed in time. They actually planned it out relatively well. It's just that they couldn't do it because of the weather, and so they ran over time. But this ship, as presumably because of one of these storms, just half sank. And so they just went, do you know what? That's quite cool. We're just going to have a half-sunk ship, and it kind of implies that people arrive here, but they don't leave. So that's okay. But what they could have done is, they could have had, they could have shown, just with a bit of trickery, film some other boat and a tentacle, and it gets pulled, and then show the half-sunk boat and go that's how that sunk. And that would have established the octopus. If you want to know the real behind-the-scenes reason for this, it was that the octopus was supposed to be more than it was. It was apparently there was an original script which I don't have access to, but it was a named character. It did have more to do, and basically it broke. It just broke. They couldn't get the puppet working, so instead they had to. They'd already got to the point where they weren't going to do that ending. It was going to be guarding the treasure and be a lot more important, and. Yeah, so they just went, okay, film a couple of close-ups of the face of the thing. We can still slightly tweak its eyebrows to make it look like it's basically alive, but mostly we'll just, probably, I think they just sort of shook it to make the rubber shake a little bit. Mm-hmm. The tentacles were quite good, I thought. The way they were able to curl around, especially, I think there's a bit where they curl around either sweet pea or olive oil, someone like that. It curls around someone.
Olive oil's legs are in the water, so they do kind of come up. Yeah, and olive oil has a line that's like, "Oh, who is that?" And kind of the olive oil, the worrying olive oil, model.
Yeah. Save me.
Oh.
Yeah, so
I think doesn't she even say something like "Don't get fresh"?
Yeah, something like that. So I thought that was good. So the octopus definitely wasn't bad. I like having a little bit of insight on that octopus, but
it just doesn't. It doesn't amount to anything, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it's not like if they had used a bad special effect in the rest of the movie to have a really obviously on a pole tentacle arm drag a dinghy underwater effect that I would have been upset, because most of the effects in the movie are about that quality anyway. So I'm already in the suspension of disbelief where I accept that that's an okay effect to have.
Well, that's the thing. There's basically no, if you think about it, there's almost no special effects anywhere in the film. It's all just acrobats doing stuff.
That and whenever Popeye gets punched one time and spins at the very end of the movie, they just speed up. It's just a fast forward, but you notice that the tide in the background also is fast forwarding. Yeah. So the effect does not work at all as for the whirlpool effect that they were going for.
Yeah.
I think that about does it.
But the octopus, frankly, I think they should have. I mean, it should have been Bluto, shouldn't it? Mm-hmm. They should have had a big. They should have had a big fight, and apparently they were going to have a big fight in the original ending. That was the plan. The octopus was just essentially it was the mini boss before Bluto, but they ran out of time before they'd filmed anything with Bluto, so they had to come up with that thing about him just swimming away in fear. And it's
Bluto's
rubbish.
Turned yellow because he's a coward, which I guess is a thing. I don't know. I'm colorblind, so I don't know. But
I bet that scene where he's seeing red didn't work for you very well, did it?
Right. I understood that they were in different clothes, and I assumed they were red because of the bull thing.
Exactly. I mean, you can get that joke. It's that they were all red. I mean, look. I mean, I've got to tell you that none of these things happen in real life. These are just cartoon tropes. So you're not missing out. There's no when people are scared, they don't turn yellow in real life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. I think that about hits all the fight scenes, and now we need to talk about the musical numbers. And that starts off with the very beginning of Popeye rowing in, and the town coming out and greeting Popeye, and Popeye walking up, and now, when I put on this movie, it was after Euan watched it, so he shared his opinions with me about the movie, and I knew you liked it, so I had two opinions that were starkly in contrast of hate and joy. And when I watched this musical scene, thought, okay, I think I can like this.
Okay.
Just from that scene. Specifically, what did it for me was just the Robin Williams did a great job at being Popeye. Regardless of anything else in the movie, I think that the only two actors you could say absolutely nailed their parts and couldn't have done a better job if asked were Shelley Duvall as Olive Oil and Robin Williams as Popeye. I thought they were both wonderful, and I would have enjoyed watching them in a movie that in my opinion, would have been better put together.
I think, as for them, I think Olive Oil is I don't think you can... Popeye, you can go well, he doesn't look much like Popeye. He doesn't have the giant chin and what have you, but it's difficult to imagine who would. Mm-hmm. So after that, you kind of go, in terms of him, the way he's figured out how to walk in a kind of Popeye way, I think he put a lot of work in, and I think it's a really good performance. Mm-hmm. As for Shelley Duvall as Olive Oil... Right, yeah. Even though he's not quite doing the duotone thing from the cartoons, he's got the sense of it, and he does the constant mumbling voiceover.
Specifically, there's a scene. The point that I knew that I would like Robin Williams as Popeye was when he was walking into the oil residence and he knocked over a piece of the railing. I was like, oh, doesn't make him like they used to's. And I was like, yep, yeah. I'm gonna like this Popeye. I'm gonna like Robin Williams as Popeye because that is something the cartoon Popeye would have said and the way he would have said it, and I liked it.
Yeah, those are some of my favorite bit. I think my favorite line is when he's reading the note over Sweet Pea, and Sweet Pea says, "I'm a baby." And he says, "You're a baby." That's what it says right here. He points to the note. Those are really good.
Yes.
And those are like my favorite bits in the old cartoons, where like he'd capsize a boat, climb up it, and mumble, "Well, that was a nice boat we had once." Those are the kind of things that I love Popeye for.
And the reason that exists is because when they made the cartoons, they were animating in a very fluid way. The Fleischers were ahead of like the game at the time, but they never quite bothered with animating the mouths. So the voice guy, Popeye would never move his mouth. So the voice guy was just like, I can just fill this cartoon with dialogue. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So he would just ramble on and on and on, and he got very good at it. Mm-hmm. And then Robin Williams wanted to replicate that, so he did actually go around mumbling on set. But also, they dubbed some mumbles over. So there are various times in the film where his mouth is not moving, but he's mumbling. And people think that's a mistake, but it isn't. That's meant to be like the cartoons.
Yeah, no, I actually remember the cartoons at least well enough to know that his mumbling happened without his mouth moving. So I like knowing that. I did like the points at which Robin's mouth wasn't moving, but his mumbling was dubbed in. Well, I liked that.
And it's nice to try and... They're sort of difficult to hear, but it's nice to kind of tune in and sort of try and hear what he's saying. There's one early on before you... It kind of takes you by surprise before you're really... You're really aware he's going to be doing it, so you're not really listening hard enough. When he first meets the taxman, and the taxman sort of heads off, and he goes, "Well, if you pay your taxes, you got to get a cervix."
Yeah.
That's one thing. My biggest issue with Popeye... I don't remember him having that many cuss sounds in his speech pattern. That like they really emphasize it early on with like, oh, it says room for rink. I don't remember him saying anything remotely like that in the cartoons, and he says it constantly.
No, you're right.
Yeah,
no,
it's more like there's a line that I remember just because random childhood memories stick with you, and there's a word he says that's a mix of disgusted and constipated, which is disgustipated. Yeah. So he'll mix words that end in different ways a lot, but I don't know if he actually.
I remember escalator, which was an escalator.
Yeah, escalator, disgustipated. So he'll add syllables and endings to other words for original words.
I don't remember that, but I do remember...
That wasn't in the movie. That was I think it was the Aladdin one.
Oh.
This is me remembering from the cartoons.
Oh, that's a good one.
To do that. Yeah.
That's a good one, yeah. No, but in the film, there's one where he's in the House of Ill Repute, and he says something like, "Oh, we better hurry out of here, or we might get a venerable disease."
Yeah. See, so some of it is good, but I do think they went a little bit of the wrong direction with the writing, and I don't know if that's on Robin's fault because it might have been ad-libbed.
Well,
or like the rink stuff wasn't probably.
A lot of it is ad-libbed. Obviously, Room for Rink isn't. That is from the comics. That's he used to have. They used to. Seagull would spell out his dialogue in odd ways, and that was kind of how. That was his weird speech pattern, and then for the cartoons, they sort of translated that into the very odd, gravelly voice that we kind of got used to.
Now we've got through the first musical number. Now the next musical number...
hold on. Sorry. I've just realised I was in the middle of answering a question about you were mentioning the cast, and I was saying that Popeye, you can imagine him another way, or played by another person, but Robin Williams kind of embodies it in a way that I think he did brilliantly. Olive Oyl. There's no point imagining a different Olive Oyl. She just looks exactly like Olive Oyl.
Yes. Yes, I think Shelley Duvall was the perfect cast and also the perfect performance for Olive Oyl because from all my memories of what Olive Oyl would say and her mumbling, because she emulated kind of Popeye's mumbling in a way that only Popeye and Olive Oyl really did, at least in the cartoons that I watched, between other characters' words in the script. Shelley Duvall not only did that correctly, she did it like timing wise at the same points that I figured that Olive Oil would do. She looked like Olive Oil, and she physically, like when she's, Olive Oil is not a coordinated person. She's very like stumbly and whatever. And I think from every perspective, Shelley Duvall hit that in a perfect chord. So I think she might have even been more perfectly cast than Robin Williams was.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. I agree with that completely. So you were telling me about your experience watching that opening number, and I'm interested to know what it's like to see that for the first time.
So I'll go first. My experience watching that opening number was, at first I didn't understand what was going on with the rowing until I saw that, like, they did that one little cut of Robin Williams being the one. Like, I figured it was Popeye, but he was wearing like a long sleeve shirt at first or something like that, to where you couldn't see that it was obviously Popeye's forearm. So I didn't know if that was Popeye at first. But then once that happened, like, okay, so that's Popeye. He's rowing into town, and then like this kind of almost musical-esque number that you'd expect in like a consecutive musical feature, just like, here they come out, they're singing, they're doing their thing. And at first I was like, I don't know if I like this, but then I thought, wait a minute, if this were a Fleischer cartoon, that would be totally normal. That would be the most normal thing in the entire cartoon, would be for them to sing a coherent song that I could barely understand because the words were kind of like there were whatever words that weren't enunciated, and like a whole group was singing them, so I only caught about every third word. And I thought, like, if this were the Fleischer cartoon, that would have been normal for me to hear as a kid, because there's so many musical numbers in cartoons as a kid. I remember I have no idea what they were saying. I just knew they were singing, and I heard like every few words. So I was just, from the beginning, I thought, yes, I approve of what's happening in front of me. Now that I know what's, like, Popeye's walking to town, and there's that really funny slapstick scene where, like, the piano falls and he ducks to pick up his pipe, which I thought was weird that it was just in the middle of the street. But then he like stands back up, then he ducks back down, like the piano's swinging, and then he pushes it back up. Like, I thought that was all a really good stage setting for me, and I thought I might actually like this.
I think that one's nearly right. I kind of think they missed what they were trying to do a little bit with that piano thing, because he stoops down sort of almost one too many times. I think it's meant to be that he sees the pipe, which is sort of his first clue that there's a Popeye here. So he sees that pipe, he bends down to pick it up, and he doesn't realize there's a piano swinging, right? So he keeps kind of standing up and then bending down to, like, he taps it out on the floor, and the piano swings again. The trouble is he does one too many ducks down and then is surprised by the piano. And the last one, I'm like, I don't know why you would ever duck if you didn't know there was a piano. But
another thing that happens in that scene that I just remembered was, I think it was Wimpy, but whoever usually kicks their hat around, and he walked the entire street kicking his hat, trying to pick it up, and then he'd kick it again, and he'd follow it. Like, that is the most cartoony thing you can do, and in real life, they somehow made it so that it worked. I thought that a scene like that would be totally stupid and would never work on film, and in real life, here was it working, and I was like, if I tried to choreograph this scene in real life, I couldn't do it. I couldn't think of a way to make this work, and I believed everything I saw in that scene. I really liked that a lot.
Well, that's Bill Irwin. That's the character Hamgravy.
Hamgravy, that's right. Yes,
the one I mentioned before. That's Olive Oil's previous boyfriend, and that's played by a guy called Bill Irwin. And basically, that was his act already. He's the one who can concertina up and things like this. And basically, they just, if any of them had little circusy skills that they could do, or little funny things they could do, they just let them do them. And I've seen another couple of things. I think he shows up in an episode of The X-Files doing something very similar, or something like that. I've seen him elsewhere. That was just part of his act, so they just sort of put it in. They found a cartoon man and let him be in the film.
Okay, I think Euan wants us to move on, and I'm ready to move on to the musical scene for He's Large.
Okay, well, I just want to talk about the musical numbers in general, because I'm okay with I like musicals. I've been getting into more lately, and I like the musical numbers in the old Popeye cartoons. I remember the Sinbad song particularly. I was really into when I was little. The musical numbers in this movie do not have they don't have melodies that are anywhere near as memorable as that. They're all kind of just sort of da 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 da. All of them are like that, and they also keep happening. Like, I think I said my least favorite scene was Popeye devolving into a baby. I think my actual least favorite scene is when Popeye and Olive Oil, they've just lost Sweet Pea, and they're singing like next to each other without necessarily hearing one another. But I think that's sandwiched immediately between two other musical numbers, and it was the point where I'm going, oh, please just stop singing.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? The songs in this are very strange.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that, didn't you say at one point, like not in this podcast earlier, that the British TV version didn't have the license to use the soundtrack? Was that what it was?
No, it's not the version I grew up with of this film has about 3 fewer songs, maybe more than it's more than the version that I assume you saw. And it's not because they didn't have the license. It's just that they cut the film down, and there's a very good, there's a very good argument for doing that, isn't there? They just decided it had too many of these weird songs. So I'll tell you about that. But on the songs in general, this is the work of Harry Nilsson, who is he's dead now. He was a brilliant songwriter, and he. This film notwithstanding, you'll have heard some of his songs. He did I Can't Live If Living Is Without You. He did One Is the Loneliest Number. Think he did a few songs that you'll have heard at some point in your life. I think he did those songs anyway. But I knew him from an album called The Point, which is this weird sort of psychedelic 60s children's album, which comes tied to an animated sort of half-hour long TV film, and it's just sort of a collection of songs with a vague story about this kid who's got he lives in a world where everyone has a point on the top of their head and he doesn't, and he has to go into the pointed forest and go on a little journey to discover what his point is, and it's lovely and it's brilliantly written. So I was already basically a fan of his when I saw this film. I was only 5 or 6 years old when I saw it, but still. So to me, it all makes sense because I kind of know what this guy's style is, which is, his melodies aren't always that. They're certainly not always sort of catchy and singable, but they are sitting on a bed of very interesting chords, and that's true in this film as well. Olive Oil's song "He Needs Me" is. It has this very odd sort of chord structure to it that's kind of his signature. But this film was done at a time when he was considered not merely past his prime, but unhireable. This was a point at which he was, I think, sort of deep in alcoholism and so on. And no one was interested in him anymore. But the same was true of the director, Robert Altman. And so he just decided to give him a chance. Because here was a guy who was going to make weird songs that didn't belong in any kind of cartoon family musical. And here was a film director who was going to make a film that didn't belong in the pantheon of family musical cartoons. So he just thought it went together nicely. And I, as you can imagine, I like the songs in this. Even I struggle with the food song. It's not a song. It doesn't really work. Mm-hmm. But the weirdness is what I like. I'm fond of the way, like all of the characters in it, like the town. None of it quite meshes or goes together, but it becomes something I find quite pretty. Like the set itself, there's nothing in that town is built properly. No, all the walls look like they're going to collapse at any minute. But I love the way it looks, and I think it's the same, I would say, of the songs. Now, how did I go into that ramble? What was the actual thing we were talking about?
Just the musicals in general was the topic, and how you had a few less of them. So I'm curious, did you have the I'm Mean song?
No, the I'm Mean song, which is a scene where Bluto he's singing a fun song about himself. I'm mean, I'm mean, I'm
which
mean.
I want to
preface.
I want to preface this by saying was the only time in the entire movie I felt like Bluto the character was Bluto from any other medium. I felt like he was this weird Minotaur-esque monster in the movie who was just so happened to be human. But in the I Mean song, he was fun and just like douchey in the way that Bluto is usually douchey and breaking things in the way that he has no respect for. I felt like I remember saying to Euan during that scene, like, this is the only time I felt like Bluto is Bluto. And you didn't get that scene when you first saw it because they cut it out, I suppose.
Sort of. Actually, what they did in the British release of this, and when I say release, for all I know, it was the same in the cinema, but on home video, it was cut down. And one of the ways that they cut it down was this scene was in the film. So the scene is him. He's angry that because he discovers that olive oil is disappeared. It's just after he's large. And so she sneaked off. He finds out that she skipped out on this engagement party. So he just smashes up the house while singing this funny song about... It's not very funny, but it's an attempt at a cartoon song. It has lines like, I'm so mean I beat myself up once, and I broke my own leg, and things like this. And it's this sort of bouncy tune. Do. But... in the British version, there's no song there, but they still play out the whole scene. So we keep the Minotaur version of Bluto all the way through, and that is actually the scariest, if scary is the right word. It's the most Minotaur Bluto moment of the film in the British version, because he just silently smashes Olive Oil's house. He just wordlessly, soundlessly, except with little grunts and snarls, picks up the furniture, smashes through throws chairs out of the windows, breaks all the windows, crunches people in half, and it's all done with this air of menace of, the bit where they're doing the, she loves me not, pulling the petals off the flower, and he gets to the end and the last petal is going to be a she loves me not. And there's this moment of him just sort of sizzling and seething, and he's obviously about to do something awful. Well, in the British version, that, it feels like of a piece with that. What he eventually does is smash up the house. Whereas in the full version, that's it's slightly disconnected by way of a musical number, and I do prefer the British version of that scene. But other scenes are truncated in similar ways. When Popeye arrives at the town and you've had the Sweet Haven anthem, the next thing that happens is he does a little weird rambly, skippy, hiccupy song as he makes his way up through the town, and people are kind of closing their doors to him, and it's called Blow Me Down, and there's this music in the background. It's mostly him he's not really singing, but it's just sort of rambled. It's a lovely day. Well, that in the British version, that scene is there, but it isn't a song. So they keep the backing music on, but they cut it differently such that what he says never lines up with the music, so you never realise it's supposed to be a song, and they also trim that scene down. So things like that. You didn't have the song that Popeye and Olive Oil sing to Sweet Pea, but actually it's secretly to each other. The song's called Sailing, and they're saying like, well, I'd like you to come and sail with me. And meanwhile, Olive Oil is saying, stay with me. So they're fighting over the baby, but there's also this undertone that they're talking to each other. That's not in the British version. And I don't miss it. It's not a great bit. What else is cut? Towards the end, when they're sailing, they're on sort of Poop Deck Pappy's boat, and they're sailing towards him, and there's this whole sequence. That's a song in the original version. It's not in the British version, and as a result...
that song sucked, by the way. I was the most bored. I think the most bored I was in the entire movie was that song, because I was like, okay, they're sailing to catch Bluto, and I think I remember saying to you, and like my eyes are glazing over. I don't care to listen or watch this movie at this current point in time because the song sucks. I know what they're doing. They're going to catch Bluto, but I don't care about the process of them going and doing it. I just want to. I just want them to go and do it. So at that point, I was the most bored I was in the entire movie.
I have a certain amount of fondness for the shots where it kind of pulls out and you see the whole boat and they're all doing different things here and there on it. I like those shots. because again, they just mirror the sort of tumbliness of the town. I like that sort of cartooniness. But yes, as a song, there's no point in it. It's not a song. It's just a little poetry recital by Pupde Papi. And I like the music in the background. I'm very fond of that. And in fact, it's been my ringtone for the whole time I've had a smartphone. But it's not a song. Yes, they should. They were right to cut that out for the British version. So there you are. We have these songs written in a hurry by I think it's reasonable of me to say a drunk. I think he was in quite a state when he did them. They were recorded very... and also in the film, they're very strange. Because on the soundtrack album, of which there was one, and I think it's on iTunes and so on, you can still hear it, they are quite lavishly produced musical numbers. The album version of He Needs Me is beautiful, and He's Large is great as well. And Blow Me Down. There's so many... and you can hear the lyrics in Sweet Haven. But... in the film, the director just had he could not care less about making the songs sound good. He wanted it all to be ramshackle. And so he mic'd them up in a way that the producers of the recent Les Mis movie adaptation went to great pains to claim they invented. No, it was done first in Popeye. These songs were all sung live by the actors on the set. They weren't miming. And of course they weren't miming. You can tell because it sounds dreadful. You have these weirdly cut down versions of the songs where essentially you've got, bass, drum kit, a piano, an accordion, and little else. Maybe a violin or two here and there. I don't know why they cut the backing music down. Presumably because the voices wouldn't be audible over it otherwise. But you can mix it differently. I don't understand why they. I don't understand why they cut the music down, but they did. And it's just all so weird as a result.
Yeah, there's definitely a point at which, and this specifically in that He Needs Me song, that you can tell that Shelley Duvall doesn't think that what she's like, and it's specifically the line, but he does! In that song, where she thinks that she's just singing so that it looks like when they eventually match up her studio version with it, that it looks like she's singing. But it feels like she didn't actually care about singing that song, and I think that they put that in the movie to match the ramshackle feel of the rest of the town. Yes, that's
right. In fact, it goes further than that. You're almost right, but it wasn't Shelley Duvall. That was a deliberate choice by the director. He even on the album, she's no better at singing. Shelley Duvall could not sing. But he just went, but it's olive oil. Have you heard what her voice is like?
Yeah.
So it was almost a joke, I think, that here was this basically unpleasant, reedy, whiny voice that was going to sing what is essentially a beautiful love song, and done. If you dropped in a professional singer, that could be lovely. It's a very intricate tune. It's very well composed, but that one's actually had a little bit of a life of its own. I think people have basically come round to feeling that at least the album version of that is genuinely pretty to listen to, even despite the fact that Shelley Duvall can't sing. It lends a sort of weird innocence to it, because of course in the film she's, but he does. She's doing an olive oil voice. It's a bit gentler what she's doing on the album, but it's still basically the same. But it just somehow got a little life of its own, and eventually it ended up on the soundtrack to Punch Drunk Love, more recently, and did quite well. I think it got a little bit of cultural cachet from that people went, oh wait, this song's actually quite nice. Most people who know it don't know it's from Popeye, and I think would be very surprised to find that it is. It's just it's almost like, that what's the Richard Harris song about the somebody's left a cake on a shelf on a windowsill or something, and it MacArthur Park. It's just a famous voice who has no real business being in a song, and the song has no real business being there, but somehow it works in some weird way.
Right.
That's the sort of song that one's emerged as. But yes, it's in the film. It's much of a piece with the rest of the soundtrack, and they even make a thing about it. There's a point where you see the villagers all like shutting their windows so they don't have to listen to it.
Yeah. Euan, do you have any other thoughts on the musicals as a whole concept in the movie?
No, I think we've covered most bases on every front. We're nearing on an hour now of talking about the Popeye movie. So.
Which is right. What I was about to introduce. If you didn't have anything, which I guess you don't have anything else to say about the musical numbers, I want to give some last words. So first, I want to start with you, Euan, on the last words. So now that we've had one man's trash, one man's treasure, you obviously think it's trash, or at least had the lowest opinion of the movie. I want to give it to you first, then to Dave, and then I'll finish with my final words since I was kind of in the middle. So What do you have to say about the movie as a whole, Euan?
Okay, so as I said, I can't be doing with the musicals. There's just too many of them, and it felt like it was exhausting after a while. I like Robin Williams. I like the town is impressive, and I like that kind of that's the kind of thing you only see in 80s movies, like when you had the big backlot of Hill Valley and Back to the Future or Gotham and
the one it reminds me of the most. The one it reminds me of the most is the sort of the pirate ship city from Hook. Which is another Robin Williams film, and it's just one of the only other times I've seen a set so lavishly built and populated.
But I like that. I like the performances. It just didn't make me laugh that often, though. Like, I can accept that it doesn't have a lot of plot if it was a funny movie, but it generally wasn't to me, and that was my biggest takeaway from it, was that I wasn't really laughing. I'll let you take the floor now.
Okay, Dave, you as the person,
prove me wrong.
This is your treasure, Dave. What do you find? What do you have to say to us, the newly initiated to the film, and to the listeners who might listen to this episode, about why this film is a treasure and is not trash?
Well, I can't say, and I won't say, that anything you've just said there is wrong, Euan. It's absolutely just a case of whether or not you happen to be able to slot into what this film is, and I just am, and most people just aren't. For instance, if we were talking about it being funny, I find very, very funny some bits in it. In particular, the bit that I go to as an example is the dinner scene early on, where Popeye has just sort of pretty much arrived. He's taken up the room in the house, and then he goes down, and it's the Oil family dinner or breakfast or whatever it is. And it's not just the family, they've got various people there. And what you have is this long rambling scene where there's about 12 people round this table, each of whom is not listening to the rest, but they're all carrying on a conversation that they think they're having with everyone else, but it isn't working. You've got Olive Oyl just sort of being sort of entitled and trying to get people to give her things and then complaining that they won't pay attention to her. You've got the mum is just sort of trying to keep everything rolling along and trying to keep the conversation going between everyone and trying to be the hostess. Popeye is just trying to sit down. But while all of this is going on, everyone is doing something. And, you know, I've seen it somewhere between 50 and 100 times, and every time I'm looking at something else because they're all doing different things. Popeye will try and put a chair down for him to sit on, and someone will just take it out of his hands and put it somewhere else. People are just sort of taking things from each other without knowing quite what's going on. You've got Wimpy there, I believe. You've got the guy who just randomly hates Wimpy, who's just pointing at him every time he gets anything he wants and is just sort of yelling things. I just find all of this funny, this interplay of stuff and business going on. I find it funny. And then it's all capped off with the fact that Olive Oyl gets so annoyed that she stands up and pushes past Popeye and can't quite get past him. So she has to push his pipe out of the way. And she stamps past him, and the pipe just sort of comes back into place like a little automatic door. And in the end, Popeye is left just sitting there with... he never got a bite to eat at all. He never got to sit down to dinner. And if you can find that funny, then that's funny. But if you can't, and it's perfectly reasonable not to, because what that scene is, as well, if you're not tuned into it the way I am, it's just a load of people blithering on and talking over each other, and there's no jokes, and it's not funny, and what's the point? So yeah, it really is just a question of the cast, the songs, the performance, the script, the fact there's no story. You generally speaking, in my experience, you either just don't like it. And I'm not going to say because you don't get it, because it's reasonable not to get it. It's not a normal film, and it doesn't really present itself. But if you do happen to slot into what the shape that it makes for you to sit in, I think it's honestly a work of genius, even if it should have had a better ending. But honestly, the best version of this film would just gradually fade out long before the ending, and just like I think the ending should be that just for the last third of the film, the camera moves further away until you're out to sea, and then you can't see it anymore.
Okay, so my final thoughts as someone who came out of the movie thinking I want to like it but I have no reason to, and hearing you talk about why you love it and Euan talk about in more detail why like it did not sit well with him, I'm still kind of at the same point of my feelings about it, where like I don't think I am a fan of Popeye the movie. I don't think I will ever rewatch Popeye the movie. But if someone were on the street to come up and say, "Hey Spanky, what do you think about the Popeye movie?" I'd say, "I think you should watch the Popeye movie." I think I would recommend, as long as someone wasn't asking me to recommend them a very good movie that is worth watching because it's very, very well made. They're to say, "Hey, what movie should I watch?" I'd probably tell them Popeye, because I think that I definitely think that it is worth watching. And in my opinion, after coming out of it, after discussing it, I think, yes, I'm glad I watched that movie, and I won't watch it again, I don't think. But I do prefer the universe in which I've watched it, so I have no regrets about it. And the parts that I did like about it, I'm sure I can just enjoy in their own segmented bits, whether it be in the album or on just YouTube clips of the funny parts of the movie.
I think that that a person that you should recommend this film to is a person who is, as I am, getting a bit tired of films being all the same as each other. You know, like I really enjoyed, for instance, the Peanuts movie, but you could have predicted how the film would be laid out and what sort of story beats it would have, and you'd have been correct, because when particularly when an adaptation now of a comic, so the Avengers movies and so on, or a cartoon, or like the recent Smurfs Magic Village film, things like this, an adaptation of a property, when that comes out, you can pretty much guess what it's going to be like, the whole experience of watching it. And with Popeye, it is nothing like anything except arguably other Robert Altman films, which themselves are extremely auteur-y and stand out as weird themselves. So if you're that sort of person and you want to see a really different approach to adapting a famous bit of pop culture, then this is that. And if you're anyone else, you're not going to understand what you're even looking at.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up our first edition of One Man's Trash on the Popeye movie. Thank you, Dave Bulmer, for joining us. If you want, you can tell everyone where they can find you.
You can find me at DemonTomatoDave on YouTube, where I talk about all sorts of silly things. You can find me on Serious Disness on iTunes and other podcast places, where seriousdisness.wigglehe.com. I said that really badly. I'm going to say it again. seriousdisness.wigglehe.com is where my animation podcast is, where myself and my friend Jahan talk about sort of Disney films and things. And that'll do. That's where you can find me.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, and stay tuned for more While Away.
Oh, is that what it's called? While Away?